The ceremonial world of Regalis did not welcome visitors. It tolerated them. Kieran Wells understood this immediately, not because anyone had told him, but because the planet itself seemed to disapprove of his existence. Gravity pressed against his shoulders with faint but undeniable judgment, as if Regalis had personally reviewed his qualifications and found them underwhelming. He stood at the edge of the Hall of Harmonies, holding a rectangular diplomatic case that suddenly weighed more than any object had a right to. The case itself was not heavy. Its contents were not heavy. But expectation had mass, and right now, it was crushing him. The hall stretched so far upward that its ceiling disappeared into a haze of suspended light. Thin structures of crystal and unknown alloys curved like frozen waves, reflecting soft white illumination that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Kieran had spent most of his life inside human buildings, which relied on practical things like lamps and ceilings and electricians who occasionally complained. Regalis did not appear to use electricians or ceilings. The Regalians themselves stood in silent formation along the chamber's edges. At first glance, they could have been human. Their height, posture, and proportions aligned with familiar biology. But their ears gave them away, long, elegant, and slightly curved backward, like delicate antennae sculpted from flesh rather than grown. Kieran had read 73 pages about those ears. He had memorized the cultural significance, the historical variations, and the diplomatic mistakes that had resulted from staring at them too long. Apparently, prolonged observation could be interpreted as an attempt to assess cognitive dominance, which, according to the guide, had once caused an ambassador from the Vega colonies to faint under pressure. No one had been entirely sure why he fainted, but it had been noted in the official records with impressive seriousness. So Kieran did not look at the ears. He looked at the floor. The floor was safer. The floor did not represent interstellar political tension. The floor did not carry 6,000 years of ceremonial tradition. The floor did not have opinions about him. He shifted slightly, careful not to break posture. His uniform, a fitted gray protocol suit embedded with a thin reactive mesh, adjusted automatically to his body temperature. The mesh was a marvel of human engineering. It could regulate heat, resist environmental toxins, and display digital credentials when required. Unfortunately, it could not regulate panic. He inhaled slowly, exhaled slowly. He had trained for this. Protocol officers existed for moments like this. They ensured that meetings between civilizations did not collapse into chaos simply because someone stood in the wrong place or breathed at the wrong time. He was very good at standing in the right place. Breathing at the right time was still a work in progress. A faint vibration passed through the floor beneath his boots. Not a tremor, not instability, movement. He resisted the instinct to look around. The Regalians had begun to shift, not visibly, not in any way a human observer would immediately recognize. But something had changed. Their stillness had become more deliberate, which meant she was coming. Queen Ella. Kieran had never seen her before, only images, still projections that failed to capture presence. Presence was something no recording could fully preserve. He became aware of his hands. They were gripping the diplomatic case too tightly. He loosened his fingers slightly, then tightened them again when he realized he had loosened them too much. This was not ideal. Somewhere behind him, one of the human delegates cleared his throat quietly. It was Ambassador Renwick. Renwick had been calm all morning, which Kieran found suspicious. Renwick was never calm. He was a man who believed stress was a form of productivity. "Steady," Renwick whispered, not moving his lips. Kieran wondered how Renwick could whisper without moving his lips. It seemed biologically unfair. "I am steady," Kieran whispered back, also without moving his lips, which made him feel briefly accomplished. "You look like you're negotiating with gravity." "I am," Kieran replied. Renwick did not respond, which meant Renwick agreed. Another vibration, closer. The air itself seemed to shift. Kieran felt it against his skin, like the subtle pressure change before a storm. Except this storm walked on two legs and ruled an interstellar civilization older than human recorded history. He kept his eyes forward. Protocol required stillness. Protocol required neutrality. Protocol required pretending he was not currently imagining every possible way he could accidentally ruin peace between two species. He wondered if anyone had ever tripped during a first contact ceremony. Statistically, someone must have. He silently promised himself he would not become statistically significant. Light shifted across the chamber's crystalline surfaces, bending around a form approaching from behind the elevated platform ahead. He saw movement in the reflections. Not directly, only fragments. A silhouette, slender, controlled. Every regalian in the chamber lowered their heads simultaneously. The synchronization was perfect, not practiced, instinctive. Kieran lowered his head as well, hoping his timing was close enough to avoid diplomatic catastrophe. His heart pounded hard enough to qualify as industrial machinery. Footsteps, soft, measured, each one precise, not hesitant, not rushed, certain. He realized suddenly and irrationally that Queen Ayla had probably never tripped in her life. He resented her slightly for that. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Expectant silence. The kind that waited to see what you would do next. Kieran stared at a single point on the floor, focusing all of his attention on not existing incorrectly. He wondered what she saw when she looked at them. Not the diplomats, not the uniforms, the individuals. Did she see nervous systems firing too fast? Did she see fear? Did she see him? He hoped not. He hoped he was professionally invisible. Invisible was safe. Invisible did not accidentally touch alien royalty. Invisible survived ceremonies. He adjusted his breathing again, slower now. Somewhere above, unseen systems hummed softly, maintaining the delicate atmospheric balance required for multi-species coexistence. Regalis did not make mistakes. Regalis did not improvise. Regalis endured, and Kieran Wells, junior protocol officer, stood at the fragile intersection between two civilizations, praying quietly to every human engineering standard ever invented that nothing unexpected would happen. He had no way of knowing that in a few moments something very small would move, a single sheet of paper, and everything would change. Kieran did not intend to look at her. In fact, he intended very strongly not to look at her. He intended to become a model of professional invisibility, a living demonstration of protocol perfection, a man so diplomatically correct that historians would forget he had ever existed. Unfortunately, human biology had its own priorities. His eyes moved. Not fully, not directly. Just enough to register her presence in the reflective surface of the crystalline floor. It was worse than looking at her directly. Reflections allowed imagination to fill the gaps. She stood on the elevated platform at the center of the Hall of Harmonies, perfectly still. The ambient light of Regalis curved around her, drawn to her silhouette as if obeying laws of physics Kieran had never studied. Her form was slender, but not fragile. There was nothing decorative about her presence. She did not appear to exist for observation. She existed because the universe had made room for her. Her ears, long and elegant, angled slightly backward, their subtle motion betraying the only visible sign that she was alive, and not an artifact carved from luminous stone. And her hair. Kieran stopped himself. He had not read 73 pages about regalian ear etiquette just to ruin everything by staring at her hair. He redirected his attention to the diplomatic case in his hands. The case contained the treaty. The treaty represented cooperation. Cooperation represented peace. Peace represented survival. Therefore, logically, the case represented survival. He tightened his grip slightly. The case did not appreciate this. Its surface display flickered softly, projecting confirmation symbols in 3 human languages in 1 regalian symbolic sequence. The symbols were beautiful in their complexity, geometric shapes layered with meaning far beyond phonetic translation. Kieran understood exactly none of it. He was fairly certain one of the symbols represented mutual prosperity. He hoped it did not accidentally represent surrender. Ambassador Renwick stepped forward, his posture straight, his confidence intact. Renwick was the kind of man who believed confidence could be weaponized. Kieran followed 2 steps behind, precisely as protocol required. No more, no less. The distance had been calculated by an entire department of specialists whose sole purpose was determining how far behind someone you should stand while representing Earth to an alien monarchy. Kieran respected those specialists. He did not want to disappoint them. The platform rose subtly as they approached, adjusting height to compensate for Regalis's slightly heavier gravity. Kieran appreciated the effort. Though he suspected the platform was not doing it for his comfort, it was doing it for visual symmetry. Everything on Regalis cared about visual symmetry. Renwick stopped. Kieran stopped. Queen Ella stood before them. This close, Kieran could see her directly without relying on reflections. He immediately regretted this. Not because she was frightening, because she was precise. Her face held no hostility, no warmth, no visible judgment. It was not empty. It was controlled. Her eyes moved across Renwick first, assessing, measuring, understanding. Then her gaze shifted, toward Kieran. He felt it. It was not invasive. It was not aggressive. It was simply thorough. He had the sudden, irrational feeling that she could see every nervous thought he had ever experienced, including the time he had accidentally waved back at someone who had not been waving at him. He held his posture. He was very proud of himself for not falling over. Renwick began the formal greeting sequence, his voice steady. Your Majesty, on behalf of the United Earth Directorate, we extend... Kieran stopped listening. Not intentionally. His brain had simply decided it had reached maximum capacity. Instead, he focused on Queen Ayela's stillness. She did not fidget. She did not shift her weight. She did not blink often. She existed in a state of complete physical certainty. Kieran wondered what that felt like. He had never experienced physical certainty in his life. Even standing still required effort. Queen Ayela inclined her head slightly. Not a bow, not submission, acknowledgement. Her voice when she spoke was calm. Earth arrives with purpose. It was not a question. Renwick nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. She looked at him for a moment longer, then shifted her gaze slightly. Back to Kieran. He was absolutely certain he was not important enough to justify this level of attention. He resisted the urge to check if someone more important was standing behind him. No one was. He was alone in her line of sight. He remembered protocol. Do not initiate eye contact longer than 3 seconds. He counted internally. 1, 2, 3. He lowered his gaze. Success. He had survived eye contact with alien royalty. He would include this achievement in his personal records, possibly frame it. The ceremony proceeded. Renwick spoke. Queen Ayela listened. Regalian officials observed in silent formation. Kieran held the diplomatic case, waiting for the precise moment when he would present it. His arms began to ache. He ignored this. Pain was temporary. Diplomatic embarrassment was permanent. A faint current of air moved through the chamber. It was subtle, likely part of Regalis's environmental stabilization system. The temperature shifted by less than half a degree. Kieran noticed anyway. Protocol officers noticed everything. That was their curse. Queen Ayela's hair moved slightly, just a fraction. The motion was delicate, almost reluctant, as if the air itself feared overstepping boundaries. Kieran watched it without meaning to. He wondered briefly how something so controlled could still move freely. It did not make sense. Regalis controlled everything. Except her. He quickly redirected his attention. He was here to present a treaty, not conduct philosophical analysis of alien hair dynamics. He adjusted his grip on the diplomatic case. He waited. The moment approached. He could feel it. The precise second when he would step forward, when history would advance, when nothing would go wrong. He was certain of it, absolutely certain, which in retrospect should have worried him. There is a very specific moment when control stops being real and becomes a story people tell themselves to feel safe. Kieran discovered that moment when the diplomatic case made a quiet, traitorous sound in his hands. A soft click. Not loud enough to draw attention. Not dramatic enough to justify panic, but unmistakable. His stomach dropped. He did not move. Protocol officers were trained to recognize equipment behavior. The case was a standard Earth Directorate diplomatic carrier, equipped with environmental seals, biometric locks, and adaptive stabilization fields designed to prevent exactly the kind of disaster Kieran was now imagining, which meant it was not supposed to click. He tightened his grip slightly. The case responded by clicking again. This time he felt the vibration through his fingers, a warning signal. His pulse accelerated immediately, his brain sprinting through every training simulation he had ever endured. Case integrity compromised. Possible seal misalignment. Possible internal pressure shift. Possible mechanical fault. Possible career termination. He resisted the urge to look down at it. Looking down would draw attention. Drawing attention would create focus. Focus would create observation. Observation would create questions. Questions would create consequences. Instead, he kept his gaze neutral, fixed somewhere near Queen Ella's shoulder, a location that had been carefully calculated to avoid both disrespect and emotional engagement. His hands, however, were beginning to sweat. The case detected this. It beeped softly. Kieran wanted to die. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly disappear from existence in a way that did not inconvenience anyone. Ambassador Renwick continued speaking, unaware that the future of human diplomacy was currently being negotiated between Kieran and a piece of malfunctioning luggage. Kieran adjusted his grip again, hoping the pressure would stabilize the internal seal. It did not. Inside the case, something shifted. A faint internal hum flickered. The stabilization field, designed to counteract external forces, recalibrated slightly. This would have been reassuring if it had not been accompanied by a gentle, horrifying realization. The case was adapting, which meant it had detected movement it did not expect, which meant something inside had moved. Kieran knew exactly what that something was. The treaty document, 6 layers of polyfiber composite, encoded with both physical and quantum authentication markers, representing months of negotiation, compromise, and careful political maneuvering. It was not supposed to move. He felt the weight distribution change in his hands. Barely, but enough. Enough to confirm his fear. A single sheet inside had shifted out of perfect alignment. He swallowed carefully. He could fix this. He would fix this. He was a protocol officer. This was his purpose. He adjusted his posture by less than a centimeter, redistributing the gravitational load on the case. The adaptive mesh of his uniform compensated instantly, reinforcing muscle groups, optimizing stability. For a moment, the case grew still. He allowed himself a microscopic sense of relief. Then the environmental system above them released a gentle atmospheric correction. It was routine, necessary, invisible. The air moved, not violently, not aggressively, just enough. The case's internal stabilization field reacted instantly, attempting to compensate for the external pressure shift. The field flickered. Inside, the misaligned sheet responded to the change in force. It slid, not far, not fast, but enough. The top edge of the document lifted, escaping the magnetic alignment grid that held it perfectly flat. Kieran felt the shift as a subtle redistribution of mass. His fingers tightened reflexively. The case responded with a soft, betrayed beep, which was when he knew, with absolute certainty, that the universe had chosen him personally for humiliation. Time slowed. Not physically, not scientifically, psychologically. His brain began calculating possibilities at speeds it had never attempted before. Option 1, do nothing. Outcome, the sheet remains unstable. Probability of containment failure, unacceptable. Option 2, adjust grip further. Outcome, increased pressure may worsen internal misalignment. Probability of catastrophic embarrassment, extremely high. Option 3, open the case and manually correct alignment. Outcome, protocol violation of the highest order. Probability of immediate diplomatic collapse, impressive. He did nothing. Doing nothing was often the safest choice. The case hummed softly, considering its own options. Then, without asking for his permission, it made a decision. The magnetic alignment grid disengaged briefly to reset calibration. Inside, gravity did what gravity always does. The sheet fell, not dramatically, not explosively, quietly. The case seal separated just enough for the edge of the document to slip free. Kieran watched in frozen horror as a single corner of the treaty emerged into open air. It moved slowly, drifting downward with serene indifference to its importance. He reacted without thinking. His hand moved. Fast, instinctively. Not as a protocol officer, as a human being trying to catch something that was falling. His fingers reached forward. At the exact same moment, Queen Alla shifted slightly. Not much, barely perceptible, just enough for the delicate strands of her silver-black hair to move within the same space his hand now occupied. He did not see it happen. He felt it, soft, warmer than the air, real. His fingers brushed against a strand of her hair. Everything stopped, not metaphorically. Actually, the Regalian guards froze instantly, their posture changing with terrifying precision. Their eyes sharpened, focusing entirely on the point of contact. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the environmental system seemed to hesitate. Kieran's brain shut down completely. He withdrew his hand immediately, his nervous system collapsing into pure, unfiltered panic. He had not meant to touch her. He had meant to catch paper. Paper had betrayed him. The treaty sheet continued drifting downward, ignored now by everyone in the chamber, because something far more important had already fallen. Protocol. Queen Ayala did not move. She did not recoil. She did not react. She simply stood there, still, alive, untouched, except for that one impossible moment. Kieran stared at the floor, his heart pounding so violently he was certain it was visible. He wondered how long executions took on Regalis. He hoped they were efficient. He hoped they were not ceremonial. He hoped irrationally that somewhere in the universe there existed a protocol manual titled What to Do After Accidentally Touching an Alien Queen. He suspected deeply that it did not exist. No one moved. The treaty sheet completed its slow, graceful descent and landed on the luminous floor with the softest sound imaginable, an almost polite tap, as if even the document understood it should not interrupt whatever had just happened. Kieran heard it anyway. Of course he did, because his senses, in a cruel act of teamwork, were now taking turns reminding him that this was real. He kept his eyes down. He kept his hands still. He kept his breathing shallow like someone trying not to startle a predator. Somewhere in his mind, a small, irrational voice insisted that if he remained perfectly motionless, everyone might forget he existed. The voice was lying. The silence in the Hall of Harmonies was not the kind humans used to. On Earth, silence had texture. Nervous coughs, shifting feet, subtle sighs. Here, silence was engineered. It was clean and absolute, as if the room had been built to remove sound, the same way a vacuum removed air. Kieran could feel the attention of hundreds of eyes. He could also feel the attention of the Regalian guards, which was different. Human attention was like a spotlight. Regalian attention was like a targeting system. Ambassador Renwick finally exhaled. It was a small sound, a human sound, and because it was the only sound, it echoed like a confession. Renwick's voice came out carefully, as if each word had to be approved by a committee before leaving his mouth. "Your Majesty, we apologize for—" Queen Alla lifted one hand. Not sharply, not theatrically, just a simple motion. Renwick stopped instantly. Kieran's knees threatened to betray him. He locked them. The guards along the chamber's edge had not drawn weapons. That was technically good news. Unfortunately, their hands were positioned in a way that suggested they did not need weapons to solve problems. A Regalian court official stepped forward slightly, long ears angled back, the movement subtle but intense. Their voice was smooth and cold. "The law is clear." Kieran heard the phrase and immediately wanted to faint, but fainting felt like a second violation. He remained upright out of pure stubbornness. Queen Alla did not look at the court official. She looked at Kieran. He felt her gaze land on him like weight, not oppressive, not crushing, just undeniable. It was the gaze of someone used to people being careful around her, used to obedience, used to fear presented as respect. Kieran's mind offered him several possible actions. Option 1, apologize repeatedly until he became vapor. Option 2, speak truthfully and risk becoming vapor anyway. Option 3, attempt to reverse time using advanced human technology, which did not exist. He chose option 1 because it was the only one available to a man with no access to time manipulation. "Your Majesty," he managed, voice tighter than he intended. I did, but not on purpose. I was trying to catch the treaty." which is, ironically, the least treaty-friendly thing I've ever done. Rennick made a strangled sound that might have been a cough or a prayer. The Regalian official's expression did not change, but their ears twitched. That was the only sign they had heard the word ironically and did not know what it meant. Queen Alla's eyes narrowed slightly. Kieran immediately worried that narrowing alien eyes meant something different than narrowing human eyes. Perhaps it meant she was activating biological laser weapons. Perhaps it meant she was calculating the most efficient method of disposal. Then she spoke. Protocol officer. 2 words, calm, precise. Kieran almost answered with yes, executioner, because his brain was not currently supervised by intelligence. He swallowed. Yes, Your Majesty. She stepped down from the platform. It was not a dramatic descent. She simply moved as if the floor belonged to her, which technically it did. The ceremonial light shifted subtly around her, the room's luminous panels adjusting to her position. Kieran had read that Regulus used responsive architecture. He had not realized it responded like this, as if the building itself was loyal. Her long ears angled slightly forward as she approached him. Kieran's chest tightened. He remembered another line from training. When Regalian ears angle forward, it indicates focus. Wonderful, he thought. I'm about to be focused into dust. She stopped at a respectful distance, close enough that Kieran could see the fine details of her face, the smooth planes, the controlled composure, the faint silver patterning along her neck that looked like natural markings rather than decoration. Her hair fell in soft waves, and now that he had touched it, accidentally, disastrously, he couldn't stop thinking about how human it had felt, which was an absolutely inappropriate thought to have while waiting for judgment. Queen Ella's gaze dropped briefly to the treaty sheet on the floor, then returned to him. Why? She asked. Did you reach? Kieran blinked. The question did not match the moment. He had expected condemnation, not curiosity. He had expected punishment, not inquiry. He answered anyway, because his survival instincts were apparently improvisational now. Because it was falling, he said. Then realizing that was too simple, he added, and because paperwork terrifies me. On Earth, paper is responsible for more suffering than most wars. Rennick inhaled sharply. Kieran could feel Renwick's silent outrage from 2 steps behind him, like radiation. Queen Alla did not react as if she knew what paperwork was, but she did react to the tone. Her head tilted slightly. You speak as if you did not consider consequence. I considered it, Kieran said quickly. Briefly, very briefly, but my hand moved before my brain filed the proper forms. He heard it leave his mouth and immediately regretted it. Humor was not supposed to happen here. Humor was dangerous. Humor made things human. But something shifted in Queen Ayala's face. Not much, just a fraction. The corners of her mouth lifted so subtly, Kieran wondered if his brain had hallucinated it out of desperation. The Regalian official stepped forward again, voice colder. Your Majesty, the untouchable statute is... Queen Ayala raised her hand again. The official stopped. It was effortless, the kind of authority that did not need volume. Kieran stared at the floor again, partly out of protocol, partly because he was afraid that if he looked up too long, he would see history bending. Queen Ayala spoke softly. You touched my hair. Kieran nodded once carefully. Yes. You did not touch my skin. No. You did not grasp. No. You did not linger. No. He felt the room listening. He felt the guards calculating. It was as if the entire ceremonial hall had become a living instrument, tuned to her voice. Queen Alla's eyes remained fixed on him. You withdrew as if burned. Kieran's mouth moved before he could stop it. Respectfully, Your Majesty, I withdrew as if I wanted to continue living. That did it. The subtle lift of her mouth returned, stronger this time. Not a smile meant for ceremony, a real one, like something that belonged to a person rather than a crown. A ripple went through the Regalian court. Not sound, not movement, but tension shifting. Kieran did not understand their culture well enough to interpret it, but he understood the basic truth. Something was happening that was not supposed to happen. Queen Ayala looked away from him for the first time, her gaze sweeping across the assembled officials and guards. Her voice remained calm, but beneath it was a quiet steel. This ceremony continues, she said. The Regalian official's ears pulled back sharply. Your Majesty, it continues, she repeated, and the second time the words felt less like a statement and more like a command written into the laws of the room. Kieran expected someone to seize him immediately afterward. Some discreet, efficient removal, a quiet dragging into a corridor where his career would end, followed by his existence. Instead, Queen Aella turned back to him, and in a tone so soft it almost felt private, she said, "After the signatures, you will remain." Kieran's blood went cold. Remain meant many things. Remain could mean questioning. Remain could mean exile. Remain could mean a very creative execution method involving ceremonial architecture. Yes, Your Majesty, he said, because there was nothing else to say. She stepped back toward the platform, her movements smooth, controlled, and yet different now, as if she had deliberately shifted one piece on a board and was curious to see what the other pieces would do. Rennick leaned in behind Kieran, lips barely moving. "What did you do?" Kieran whispered back. "I fought gravity, paperwork, and ancient law simultaneously. Gravity won." Rennick's jaw tightened. "Try not to fight anything else." "I will do my best," Kieran murmured, "but I can't guarantee the air conditioning won't declare war." The ceremony resumed. Voices returned. Movements restarted. But nothing was truly normal again, because every being in the Hall of Harmonies had just witnessed something impossible. The Queen had been touched, and she had not punished the one who did it. Kieran stood in his assigned position, holding a now properly sealed diplomatic case with the careful tenderness one might reserve for a dangerous animal. He watched the treaty proceed towards signature and felt with sick certainty that his life had already split into two versions, the one where he was a protocol officer, and the one where Queen Aella, ruler of Regulus, had looked at him like he was not merely a mistake, like he was a question. The treaty signing did not collapse. This, in Kieran's opinion, was deeply suspicious. He stood exactly where protocol demanded, holding the diplomatic case with the focused intensity of a man who had recently learned that even harmless objects could betray him. His fingers were dry now. He had made sure of that. He had subtly wiped his palms against the interior seam of his uniform while no one was looking, an act of quiet desperation disguised as professionalism. Queen Aella had returned to the platform. She stood as she had before, composed and distant, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Kieran knew better. He could not explain how he knew. He simply did. Ambassador Renwick extended the treaty document. This time, Kieran did not assist. This time, he allowed gravity and destiny to negotiate without his involvement. Queen Aella accepted the document with deliberate precision. Her fingers, long and steady, held the polyfiber composite sheet as if it were something fragile, though it was engineered to survive atmospheric re-entry. Her eyes scanned the surface. Kieran watched her without looking at her, a skill he had developed in the last 4 minutes out of sheer survival instinct. Regalian text glowed faintly beneath her touch, symbols rearranging themselves in response to her biometric signature. The treaty recognized her. The treaty accepted her. The room remained silent. Not empty, expectant. Kieran wondered how many wars had begun in rooms quieter than this. He hoped this was not one of them. Queen Aella reached for the ceremonial stylus resting beside her. It was not a pen. It was older than that. It was a thin rod of unknown metal, its surface etched with patterns that seemed to shift depending on how light touched them. Kieran had read about it in preparation materials. The stylus was older than human civilization. It had signed treaties, declared alliances, and once, according to Regalian Historical Archive, ended a war without writing a single word. Kieran did not understand how that worked. He hoped he never would. She pressed the stylus gently against the document. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stylus emitted a faint, harmonic tone. Not sound exactly, but vibration translated into something human senses could perceive. Light spread outward from the point of contact, flowing across the treaty surface like liquid geometry. Her signature was not written, it was grown. Patterns formed, layered, intertwined, encoding identity beyond language. It was beautiful in a way that made human signatures look embarrassingly primitive. Kieran suddenly felt inadequate on behalf of his entire species. Queen Ayla lifted the stylus. The treaty was complete. Ambassador Renwick exhaled. It was subtle, but Kieran heard it. Renwick turned slightly toward him, his face neutral, his voice barely audible. "Do not," Renwick whispered, "touch anything else." Kieran nodded once. He had never agreed with anything more strongly in his life. Regalian officials stepped forward to confirm the signature. Their movements were precise, economical. They did not waste motion. They did not waste attention. One of them glanced briefly at Kieran, not hostile, not forgiving, evaluating. Kieran resisted the urge to apologize again. He had already apologized once. Multiple apologies might suggest instability. Instability might suggest weakness. Weakness might suggest he was edible. He chose silence. Queen Ella returned the stylus to its resting position. Her eyes moved across the chamber, not scanning, observing. Kieran had the distinct feeling she was measuring consequences. He wondered if he was one of them. The Regalian official who had objected earlier stepped beside her. Their voice was calm, but beneath it was something sharper. "The ceremony concludes successfully, Your Majesty." Not accusation, not approval. Statement. Queen Ella inclined her head slightly. "Yes." One word. Final. The tension in the chamber shifted, not gone, changed. Regalian guards adjusted their stance, their alert posture easing by a fraction. Human delegates allowed themselves to breathe normally again. Kieran remained perfectly still. He was afraid movement might attract narrative attention. Ambassador Renwick turned fully toward him now, his expression composed but his eyes alive with restrained panic. "Protocol officer," Renwick said quietly, through clenched professionalism. "You will remain." Kieran nodded. "Yes, Ambassador." Renwick studied him for a moment longer, as if trying to calculate how much damage one human being could cause in a single afternoon. "Try not to evolve further," Renwick added. "I will resist all personal growth," Kieran replied softly. Renwick closed his eyes briefly. Then he turned and joined the departing delegation. And just like that, Kieran Wells, junior protocol officer, was alone among aliens who had watched him break one of their oldest laws. He did not move. He did not speak. He waited. Regalian officials began exiting the chamber in silent coordination. Their robes, if they could be called robes, shifted subtly with their movement, the material responding to their body heat and neural signals. Regalian technology did not simply obey, it anticipated. Kieran wished his own clothing anticipated embarrassment. Queen Ayla remained on the platform. She had not left. She stood with the same impossible stillness, yet now that stillness felt different. Less like distance, more like consideration. Kieran stared at a neutral point in space slightly to the left of her shoulder. He did not know where else to look. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time had stopped behaving normally. Finally, she stepped down. The sound of her footsteps was soft, but in the empty chamber, it might as well have been thunder. She stopped in front of him again. Closer this time. Close enough that he could see the fine detail of her eyes. Gray, but not empty gray. Living gray, storm gray. She studied him. Not like a ruler studies a subject, like a scientist studies an anomaly. "You remained," she said. He nodded carefully. "You told me to." Her ears shifted slightly at that. He had no idea what it meant. Most of Regulus had emptied behind her. The guards remained, but they stood farther back now, observing, ready. He wondered if they had names. He wondered if they were bored. He wondered if they had ever touched their queen by accident and survived. Probably not. Queen Ayla's gaze moved to his hands. He froze instantly. Had he done something wrong again? His hands remained at his sides, perfectly still, perfectly harmless. "You fear them," she said. He blinked. "My hands?" "Yes." He considered lying. He decided lying to alien royalty was an advanced mistake. "Yes," he admitted. Her head tilted slightly. "They obey you." Kieran almost laughed, but he stopped himself just in time. Laughing during post-violation evaluation felt strategically unwise. "They don't," he said. "They improvise." She watched him for a long moment. He wondered what she saw. A threat? A mistake? A curiosity? He hoped curiosity was survivable. She stepped closer. Not enough to touch, enough to remove distance. You acted without permission, she said quietly. Yes. You acted without command. Yes. You acted without certainty. He hesitated. Yes. Silence settled between them again. Not hostile, not comfortable. Something else. Queen Ayala studied his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Then she said something he did not expect. No one does that here. Kieran frowned slightly. I recommend it cautiously, he said. It's very stressful. For a fraction of a second, her composure cracked. Not fully, but enough. Enough to reveal something underneath the crown. Something alive. Something curious. And for the first time since arriving on Regalis, Kieran Wells realized something even more dangerous than violating protocol. He had been noticed. The chamber did not empty completely. It only pretended to. Kieran could feel it. Even after the last visible court official had departed and the echo of their footsteps dissolved into the vast architecture, the Hall of Harmonies remained aware. The walls themselves were alive with quiet observation. Thin crystalline veins running through the towering structures pulsed faintly, carrying energy, information, and perhaps judgment. He suspected Regalis did not believe in privacy. Queen Ayala stood in front of him, close enough that he could hear the subtle rhythm of her breathing. It was slower than his, measured, efficient, as if her body had never wasted effort on unnecessary panic. Kieran envied that. His own breathing still behaved like it was being chased. Neither of them spoke. He wondered if she was waiting for him to say something. He wondered if silence was a test. He wondered if breathing incorrectly was illegal here. Her eyes moved across his face with precise attention, not intrusive, not aggressive, but thorough in a way that made him feel catalogued. You are unstable, she said. Kieran blinked. There were many responses available to him. Most of them involved denial or running. Instead, he said, yes. Her ears shifted slightly forward. You accept this. He hesitated. I have years of personal evidence, he admitted. For a brief moment, she did not respond. Then something extraordinary happened. She exhaled. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was real. Not the controlled, ceremonial breath of a ruler maintaining perfect composure. A natural breath. He had the strange and sudden realization that very few people on this planet had ever seen her do that. She began walking, not away from him, around him, slowly. Kieran froze instinctively, unsure if he was supposed to turn with her or remain facing forward like a decorative object. He chose stillness. It was his strongest skill. Her footsteps were silent against the luminous floor, but he could feel her movement through the faint shifts in air pressure. Regalis's environmental systems compensated constantly, maintaining perfect atmospheric balance. They adjusted temperature, density, and oxygen content in real time, which meant the planet itself was aware of her position, which meant the planet was now aware of him. He tried not to take that personally. You are not important, she said. He nodded immediately. Yes. She stopped behind him, close enough that he could feel her presence at his back. Yet, she continued, you changed the chamber. Kieran frowned slightly. I apologize, Emma, he said. You misunderstand. He waited. She stepped forward again, returning to stand in front of him. The chamber has existed for 9,412 years, she said calmly. In that time, no one has touched me within it. Kieran swallowed. He was becoming increasingly aware that statistics were not his friend. I have ruined a very impressive record, he said softly. Her gaze did not leave his. Yes. He appreciated her honesty. Silence stretched again, but it was different now. Less sharp, less dangerous, or perhaps he was simply becoming accustomed to danger. He noticed something he had not noticed before. Her hair had settled differently, one strand slightly out of alignment with the others. He stared at it for exactly 1 second too long. Her eyes narrowed slightly. He looked away immediately. I was not analyzing it, he said quickly. I was analyzing it, but professionally, not personally. He paused. That sounded worse out loud. She tilted her head. You fear error. Yes. You committed error. Yes. You remain functional. He blinked. Yes. Her ears shifted again, that subtle forward motion he was beginning to associate with focus. This is unusual. He almost laughed. My entire life is unusual, he said, but rarely in ways that benefit international diplomacy. She studied him for a long moment. Then she asked, why did you not pretend it did not happen? The question caught him off guard. I considered it, he admitted, for approximately half a second. And why did you reject this option? He thought about it. Because pretending felt impossible. Because she had seen him. Because lying to her felt like lying to gravity. Because it happened, he said simply. Her gaze held his. Regulus's light shifted faintly around them, responding to unseen inputs. You are inefficient, she said. He nodded. I am extremely inefficient. And yet, she continued, you acted. He smiled slightly. I panicked, he corrected. She considered that. No, she said. You decided? He did not know how to respond to that. No one had ever described his panic as decision before. He was fairly certain panic did not qualify as a leadership skill. Behind her, one of the distant crystalline structures emitted a faint harmonic tone, signaling a shift in the palace's internal systems. Regulus was adjusting something, monitoring them. He suddenly became aware of how close they were standing, not touching, but close enough that he could see the subtle movement of her pupils as she observed him. Close enough that protocol was no longer a comfortable shield. Close enough that he had no idea what he was supposed to do with his hands. He chose stillness again. Stillness was safe. Stillness had not yet started an interstellar incident. You are afraid, she said. He nodded. Yes. You remain. He nodded again. Yes. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with quiet intensity. Why? The question was simple. The answer was not. Because leaving without permission would be worse. Because running from alien royalty lacked dignity. Because something in her presence made running feel unnecessary. He chose the safest answer. Because you told me to remain. Her eyes held his. For a moment he thought she might say something else. Instead, she did something far more dangerous. She stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to remove distance. The air between them felt different. Charged, not hostile. Aware. Her voice, when she spoke again, was softer. You touched my hair. He froze. Yes. She watched him carefully. You did not intend to. No. You did not seek advantage. No. You did not seek power. He shook his head. No. Silence again. Then quietly she said, no one has ever done this. He did not know if she meant touching her hair or seeing her as something other than untouchable. He did not ask, because he suspected the answer might change everything. Behind them, the Hall of Harmonies remained alive. Ancient systems watching, recording, remembering. Kieran Wells stood in the presence of a queen who had ruled longer than his species had possessed electricity. And for reasons he did not fully understand, she was not looking at him like a mistake. She was looking at him like a possibility. Regalis had many kinds of silence. There was ceremonial silence, which existed to honor tradition. There was political silence, which existed to conceal truth. And there was the silence that now stood between Queen Alla and Kieran Wells, which existed because something irreversible had already happened, and neither of them yet understood its full shape. 3 days had passed since the treaty signing. 3 days since he had accidentally committed one of the most historically inappropriate hair-related actions in recorded Regalian civilization. 3 days during which he had not been executed. Kieran considered this progress. He stood now in the inner garden of the palace, a place that did not officially exist on any diplomatic map. Regalian architecture rose around him in gentle curves, its crystalline surfaces alive with faint internal light. Above, the sky of Regalis shimmered with artificial clarity, atmospheric regulators bending solar radiation into a constant, perfect dawn. It was unsettling. He missed clouds. Clouds made mistakes. This place did not, except apparently for him. He stared at a structure growing from the garden floor, a tall, slender formation that looked like glass but pulsed faintly with organic rhythm. It was a memory tree according to the palace archives. It did not grow from soil. It grew from encoded historical data, each pulse representing events stored within its crystalline lattice. Regalis remembered everything. Kieran wondered if it would remember him as a diplomatic catastrophe or an amusing footnote. Footnote felt safer. Behind him, he heard her footsteps. He did not turn immediately, not because of protocol, because he no longer needed protocol to tell him she was there. You returned, Queen Ella said. He smiled faintly. You told me to remain. Her ears shifted slightly, a motion he had learned to recognize as acknowledgement. He turned then. She stood without ceremonial attire, without crown or escort. Her clothing was simple by Regalian standards, fluid material that shifted gently with her movement, responding to neural signals rather than gravity. She looked less like a queen, more like herself. He realized suddenly that this was the first time he had seen her without the weight of the Hall of Harmonies pressing against her existence. You are still afraid, she observed. He considered denying it. He did not. Yes. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. But you remain. He nodded. Yes. This time the answer felt different. Not obedience. Choice. She studied him with the same quiet intensity she had shown since the moment everything had changed. You have altered outcome, she said. He frowned slightly. I dropped paperwork, he corrected. She ignored that. The untouchable statute existed to preserve distance, she continued. Distance preserved authority. Authority preserved control. He listened carefully. You removed distance, she said. He shifted his weight. Accidentally. Yes. Silence followed. Not empty. Reflective. For 9,000 years, she said quietly, no one has touched the queen. He resisted the urge to apologize again. You did, she continued. He waited. And nothing ended. He blinked. It was such a simple statement, such an enormous realization. Nothing had ended. The palace still stood. The treaty still held. Regalis still endured. The universe had not collapsed because one human had acted without permission. He felt something inside him shift, not relief, understanding. You were never fragile, he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes sharpened slightly. No, she agreed. They stood in silence, the memory tree pulsing softly beside them, recording without judgment. He realized he was no longer thinking about his hands. He was no longer thinking about protocol. He was thinking about her, not as a queen, as a person who had lived inside a system designed to prevent contact. You asked me why I reached, he said. She nodded once. Yes. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. Because it felt wrong to let something fall when I could stop it. She considered that. Even if the law required it. Yes. Her gaze held his. And now? She asked. He hesitated. Now, he said slowly, I understand that some laws exist to protect people. He paused. And some exist to protect distance. She stepped closer, close enough that the air between them shifted. You have changed, she said. He smiled slightly. I've had an educational week. Her mouth curved faintly in response. Not ceremony, not performance. Real. For the first time since arriving on Regalis, he did not feel like an anomaly waiting to be corrected. He felt like someone who had survived contact with something larger than himself. Not untouched, changed. Behind them, the palace systems hummed softly, ancient and aware. The memory tree pulsed again, storing this moment among thousands of years of perfect, untouchable history. Except now, history was no longer untouchable. Queen Ella stepped even closer, not by accident, by choice. You no longer fear your hands, she observed. He looked down briefly. She was right. He didn't. They are still dangerous, he said carefully. Her ears shifted forward slightly. Yes, she agreed. He met her gaze. So are you. Silence. Then something remarkable happened. She did not step away. She remained, not queen and subject, not ruler and mistake. Two beings standing at the fragile intersection between tradition and change. The distance between them existed, but it no longer ruled them. And for the first time in 9,000 years, Regalis witnessed something it had never recorded before. Not violation, not rebellion, connection. Kieran Wells had arrived on Regulus as a protocol officer whose purpose was to prevent mistakes. He would leave as the man who proved that sometimes the most important change began with one